ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and concerned citizens, let me begin with a simple but powerful truth. We are living in a moment when history is turning against reckless leadership. Tonight, I want to speak directly and plainly about why Donald Trump's plan is collapsing right before our eyes. What looked just a few years ago like an unshakable political strategy has begun to unravel under the weight of reality, economics, and global resistance. Trump's foreign policy, often branded under the banner of America First, has been unraveling in ways that expose its internal contradictions and unsustainable nature. At first glance, it promised strength, sovereignty, and a return to national pride. But what is happening today tells a very different story, a story of a country increasingly isolated, of allies who no longer trust Washington, and of adversaries who are more emboldened than ever before. The collapse of this approach is not sudden, it is the inevitable outcome of choices that disregarded the realities of global interdependence. When Trump first advanced his foreign policy vision, it struck a chord with a segment of the American population who felt left behind by globalization and frustrated with endless foreign entanglements. His rhetoric of standing up for America sounded bold, even refreshing to many. But what did it deliver in practice? Rather than strengthening America's position, his policies often weakened long-standing alliances. Look at NATO, an alliance that has been the cornerstone of American and European security for decades. Under Trump, trust between the U.S. And its European partners frayed. Instead of reinforcing solidarity, he berated allies, questioned commitments, and threatened withdrawal. What was the result? A weakening of Western cohesion at the very moment when global challenges, from Russia's assertiveness to China's rise, demanded unity. Consider the Asia Pacific, where America's influence has traditionally balanced China's growing power. Trump's trade war with China was marketed as a bold strike for American workers, but the execution alienated regional partners who were caught in the crossfire. Countries that once leaned toward Washington began hedging their bets, pursuing closer ties with Beijing, which presented itself as the steady and pragmatic alternative. The irony here is striking. In trying to isolate China, Trump often isolated the United States instead. What about the Middle East? Trump positioned himself as the great deal maker, promising breakthroughs and stability, yet his withdrawal from the Iran nuclear deal, a painstakingly negotiated agreement, destabilized the region further. It alienated European allies who had invested in diplomacy and emboldened hardliners in Tehran. The so-called maximum pressure campaign failed to achieve its stated goals. Instead, it left the region more volatile, with Iran expanding its nuclear program and U.S. credibility as a reliable negotiating partner diminished. When you withdraw from agreements without offering workable alternatives, you do not project strength, you project unpredictability. And unpredictability breeds mistrust. Let us not forget global institutions, from the World Health Organization to the United Nations. Trump's disdain for multilateralism was clear, but in weakening America's role within these frameworks, he did not dismantle them. Instead, he created vacuums that others, particularly China, were more than willing to fill. Leadership, once lost, is not easily regained. The world does not wait for Washington to come around. It moves forward, and America risks being left behind. This is the crux of the collapse of failure to understand that global power is not sustained by shouting louder, but by building trust, reliability, and cooperative networks. The hooks here are unavoidable. Ask yourself, what does it mean for America when European leaders discuss strategic autonomy, when Asian allies increasingly hedge toward Beijing, when global institutions shape rules without US input? These are not abstract questions. They cut directly into the heart of America's ability to influence the world, to shape standards, and to protect its own interests. Trump's foreign policy has created precisely the opposite of what it promised. Instead of unrivaled American strength, it has exposed profound vulnerabilities. What we see today is not simply the decline of a strategy, but the exposure of its flaws. A foreign policy built on confrontation without coalition, on withdrawal without alternatives, and on slogans without substance will inevitably collapse under its own weight. This is exactly what is happening right now. America is finding itself more alone, less trusted, and less able to rally the world in moments of crisis. And that is not a show of strength. It is a display of weakness disguised as bravado. The world has noticed. And more importantly, so have the American people. Trump's economic promises were delivered with the kind of confidence and certainty that resonated with millions of Americans. He claimed he would bring back jobs, revive manufacturing, and restore economic greatness by putting American workers first. His message was sharp, simple, and emotionally powerful. Yet when we look at the outcomes, we see a very different picture emerging, one where the gains were short-lived, unevenly distributed, and built on policies that lacked sustainability. This is where the collapse of his economic vision becomes undeniable. It is not enough to promise revival. A leader must deliver structural change that benefits the many, not just the few. The tax cuts of 2017 were presented as a cornerstone of his economic plan. They were marketed as a lifeline for middle class families and small businesses, a way to put more money in people's pockets and fuel investment across the country. But when the dust settled, who truly benefited? The wealthiest corporations and individuals. Corporate stock buybacks soared to record levels, enriching shareholders and executives, while wages for ordinary workers barely moved. The temporary bump in take home pay did little to offset the deeper inequalities that were widening. The hook here is clear. If economic growth looks impressive on paper, but fails to improve the daily lives of most citizens, is it truly success? Trump's trade policies, especially the tariffs against China, were promoted as a bold defense of American industry. He promised that tariffs would revive steel, aluminum, and manufacturing jobs that had been hollowed out for decades. The reality was starkly different. Instead of strengthening industries, the tariffs raised costs for American businesses that relied on imported components. Farmers, once among his strongest supporters, were left stranded when China retaliated with tariffs on U.S. agricultural exports. Billions in federal bailout payments had to be funneled into the farm sector just to soften the blow. This was not the winning trade war that had been promised. It was a patchwork of reactive measures, a policy built on spectacle rather than strategy. And the question Americans began asking was simple: how long can you fight a trade war when your own citizens are the ones paying the price? Inflationary pressures, rising consumer costs, and ballooning deficits further exposed the fragility of Trump's economic agenda. He often spoke of cutting waste and balancing the books, but the reality was record-breaking federal deficits. By the end of his term, the national debt had surged by trillions. While he blamed external crises, the truth is that structural imbalances were already baked into his economic model. Tax cuts without corresponding revenue, tariffs that disrupted supply chains, and spending that far outpaced growth created a fiscal burden that Americans continue to carry. At the heart of his economic collapse lies a failure to distinguish between short-term optics and long-term resilience. Yes, headline GDP growth ticked up in spurts, and unemployment figures looked strong before the pandemic. But those numbers mask deeper vulnerabilities, wages that stagnated, household debt that grew, and economic inequality that widened further. The hooks write themselves. What good is economic growth when a vast majority of citizens still feel like they are falling behind? How can a plan be called a success when its benefits are so narrowly concentrated at the top? Trump also underestimated the reality of globalization. In an interconnected world, trying to wall off America through tariffs and economic nationalism did not insulate the economy. It exposed it to greater risks. Supply chains were disrupted, costs rose, and global partners sought new alliances. Instead of positioning the U.S. as a leader in innovation and cooperation, the economic approach isolated it from critical global markets. Businesses that once thrived on exports and international partnerships found themselves squeezed, uncertain, and unable to plan for the future. The unraveling of Trump's economic promises reveals a profound truth. Slogans cannot substitute for structural solutions. Real economic revival requires investment in education, infrastructure, technology, and fair trade practices that benefit the many, not the few. His plan collapsed because it was never designed to address the deeper causes of economic frustration. It was a patchwork of political theatrics designed for applause lines rather than sustainable prosperity. Americans were promised a great revival, but what they received was temporary sugar highs and long-term imbalances. The lesson becomes unavoidable. When policies enrich the wealthy but leave the working class struggling with higher costs and greater uncertainty, the system cannot hold. When promises outpace delivery, trust erodes, and when reality catches up with rhetoric, collapse is inevitable. Trump's economic vision is unraveling not just in statistics, but in the lived experience of millions of Americans who feel the promises made to them were broken. Trump's political strategy was once described as a movement unlike anything America had seen in recent decades. It was raw, emotional, on and electrifying to millions of his supporters. He had the ability to turn rallies into spectacles, to dominate the news cycle with a single phrase, and to transform anger into a unifying political force. For a time, it seemed unstoppable. Yet, as we look closely at the current moment, that energy is fading, the slogans are losing their force, and the very foundation of his strategy is beginning to collapse. The political fire that once seemed impossible to extinguish is being smothered by the weight of reality, fatigue, and unmet promises. The essence of Trump's political appeal was built on the idea that he alone could fix a broken system. He framed himself as the outsider, the fighter against elites, the man unafraid to say what others wouldn't dare. That image was powerful in 2016 when disillusionment with politics was at a high point. But the challenge with populist politics is that once the promises fail to materialize, the aura of invincibility begins to crack. How many times can you say the best is yet to come when the everyday lives of people feel unchanged or even worse than before? That is the hook that now haunts Trump's political brand, the gap between what was promised and what was delivered. Rallies that once drew enormous enthusiasm are showing signs of repetition. The same lines, the same grievances, the same chants, once thrilling, now familiar. Political theater can only carry a movement so far before people begin to ask deeper questions. Where is the progress? Where are the solutions? Where is the fulfillment of the grand vision that was painted years ago? It is here that his strategy falters because it was built not on a roadmap for governance, but on perpetual grievance. Anger can ignite, but it cannot sustain. Trump also relied heavily on portraying himself as the inevitable leader, the figure who could not be challenged within his own party. For years, fear of his base kept Republican lawmakers in line, but cracks are forming as some within his own party begin to calculate whether continued allegiance carries more risk than reward. Political dominance built on intimidation is fragile because once it begins to weaken, rivals step forward. The hooks here are striking. What happens when a leader who built his power on the aura of inevitability begins to look vulnerable? What happens when the myth of invincibility collapses in real time? Outside the Republican base, the broader American electorate has shifted. Suburban voters, younger generations, and independents who once gave him a chance are moving away. The constant turmoil, the endless controversies, and the lack of forward looking policy have created fatigue. People crave stability, solutions, and vision, not perpetual conflict. Trump's strategy, designed to thrive on division, now struggles in an environment where many Americans simply want to move on. The more he leans into the old playbook of chaos, the more he risks alienating the very groups he needs to win. Even his relationship with the media, once a key driver of his dominance, has changed. In 2016, every tweet, every outburst was breaking news. He understood how to manipulate the spotlight, how to keep the cameras fixed on him. But now the spectacle has grown stale. Media outlets no longer cover every statement with the same breathless intensity. Rivals and critics are learning to redirect attention, to deny him the monopoly on outrage that he once enjoyed. Without constant dominance of the narrative, his political strength diminishes. The collapse of Trump's political strategy is not an abrupt implosion, but a gradual erosion. The slogans that once electrified are becoming echoes. The aura of inevitability is giving way to vulnerability. The anger that once united is turning into fatigue, even among some of his loyalists. And this is the crucial hook. A political strategy that depends on constant escalation eventually burns itself out. There is only so long you can keep the public in a state of perpetual fury before exhaustion sets in. What made Trump powerful is now what makes him vulnerable. His strategy was never about building institutions, creating sustainable policies, or expanding beyond his base. It was about spectacle, dominance, and the projection of strength. But when the spectacle loses its luster, when dominance is challenged, and when strength is exposed as performance rather than substance, the strategy collapses. That is precisely what is unfolding before our eyes. Trump's reliance on division as the cornerstone of his political model seemed, for a time, to be his greatest strength. He tapped into deep frustrations, cultural resentments, and economic insecurities turning them into a force powerful enough to reshape American politics. He did not attempt to unify the country. Instead, he thrived on amplifying conflict, pitting one group against another, and casting himself as the champion of one side in an endless battle. It worked as a political weapon in the short term, galvanizing crowds, dominating media cycles, and polarizing the national conversation. But division as a governing strategy has limits. It cannot build, it cannot sustain, and ultimately it collapses under its own weight. What once looked like an engine of power has become a trap that erodes credibility, weakens coalitions, and alienates the very citizens whose support he claimed to command. The rhetoric of us versus them can ignite passion, but it cannot deliver solutions. Trump's political message thrived on anger against immigrants, against the media, against elites, against political opponents. Every problem was framed not as a challenge to be solved collectively, but as a weapon to deepen fault lines. The hook here is unmistakable. How can a country solve its most pressing crisis when its leader depends on keeping citizens at war with one another? Division might electrify rallies, but it paralyzes governance. We saw this in the way institutions came under constant attack. The courts, the press, the electoral system, all were painted as enemies whenever they did not align with Trump's narrative. For a loyal base, this strategy reaffirmed their distrust of the establishment. But for the broader public, it raised alarms about the erosion of democratic norms. Leaders who attack institutions may consolidate short-term support, but they simultaneously weaken the very structures that provide long-term stability. Once those institutions are undermined, the public begins to wonder if the system is always rigged, then what is the point of participating? The seeds of division, once sown, grow into cynicism that even the leader himself cannot control. Trump's divisive model also created a ceiling for his support by positioning himself as the leader of his America against the other America. He limited his ability to expand beyond a dedicated base. In politics, energy and loyalty are valuable, but without expansion, they are insufficient. Time and again, elections revealed this ceiling. The base turned out, but independents and moderates, tired of the perpetual chaos, began to drift away. The hook writes itself here. How can a political movement built on narrowing the tent hope to govern a nation that is vast, diverse, and complex? Division also carried economic consequences. Policies crafted not for consensus but for symbolic fights often fell short of addressing real problems. Immigration debates became about fear rather than solutions. Trade wars became about punishment rather than long-term strategy. Domestic policy turned into endless battles over identity rather than serious investment in education, infrastructure, and opportunity. The energy of division distracted from the work of governance, leaving problems unsolved and frustrations deeper than before. The irony is that Trump's own reliance on division has started to fracture even his loyal base. Some who once saw him as the fighter for their cause now question whether constant battles have delivered meaningful change in their lives. Farmers, workers, and small business owners who bore the brunt of his policies are beginning to see that slogans cannot fill bank accounts or stabilize futures. The hook that now emerges is haunting. Can a leader who thrives on conflict ever provide the stability his people truly crave? Over time, a politics of division turns into a politics of exhaustion. Anger may energize a campaign, but it wears down a society. Citizens grow wary of being told who to hate, who to fear, and who to blame. They long for solutions, for leadership that looks beyond constant conflict. Trump's strategy, once seen as disruptive brilliance, now shows itself as a cycle of self-destruction. Division, when it becomes the only tool in the box, ceases to be effective. It becomes predictable, repetitive, and ultimately ineffective. The collapse of this model is visible now in the cracks spreading across his coalition, in the wariness of the broader electorate, and in the inability to translate rage into results. Division built Trump's rise, but it is also the force undermining his hold. It has left America more fractured, yes, but it has also revealed the limitations of a politics that thrives on tearing down rather than building up. The greatest hook of all is this: a leader who relies on division may succeed in capturing attention, but he cannot hold a nation together. The central flaw in Trump's leadership is that rhetoric was always mistaken for reality and performance was confused with policy. He mastered the art of the soundbite, the headline grabbing phrase, and the relentless projection of strength. For a while, this created the illusion of control, the sense that he was reshaping America's place in the world and revitalizing its economy at home. But as time has passed, the cracks in that illusion have widened, and the contrast between what was said and what was delivered has become impossible to ignore. The collapse we see now is the collapse of a political project that was built on slogans rather than solutions. And the unavoidable hook is this: no matter how loud the rhetoric, reality always catches up. One of the clearest examples lies in trade policy. Trump declared that tariffs would be easy to win, that America would stand strong while competitors buckled under pressure. The rhetoric was sharp, almost defiant, and it resonated with those who believed foreign competitors had long taken advantage of the United States. But what did the reality show? Costs rose for American consumers, manufacturers struggled with disrupted supply chains, and retaliatory tariffs hit U.S. farmers directly in their livelihoods. The image of the tough negotiator was powerful, but the reality was billions in bailouts to keep family farms afloat. That contradiction between the promise of victory and the lived experience of loss has eaten away at the credibility of his message. In foreign affairs, the gap between words and outcomes was equally stark. Trump spoke of peace, strength, and historic breakthroughs, but his actions often led to greater instability. He promised to end endless wars, yet escalated tensions with Iran to dangerous levels. He claimed to realign alliances in America's favor, yet left NATO partners questioning U.S. reliability. The hook is sharp here. How can a leader boast of winning on the world stage when allies lose faith and adversaries see opportunity in the chaos? Rhetoric may sound like strength in the moment, but reality is measured in long-term trust and credibility. Domestically, the promise of economic revival also collided with reality. He spoke of bringing back jobs, revitalizing manufacturing, and delivering prosperity to forgotten communities. The optics were carefully staged: factory visits, signing ceremonies, declarations of victory. But the deeper trends told another story. Wages remained stagnant, inequality widened, and debt ballooned. The reality for many workers was not revival, but continued struggle. A political message built on the greatest economy in history could not withstand the day-to-day reality of families struggling to make ends meet. The gap between the slogan and the kitchen table was simply too large to ignore. Even within his base, fatigue began to set in. Constant claims of victory, constant declarations of being the greatest at everything began to sound hollow when ordinary life did not reflect that triumph. Supporters who once thrilled at the defiance started to quietly ask themselves, if everything is going so well, why am I still struggling? That private question is one of the most powerful hooks of all because it erodes loyalty not through opposition, but through disappointment. And disappointment is far harder to reverse than anger. The reliance on rhetoric also created vulnerability in times of crisis. When the pandemic struck, declarations and slogans could not substitute for preparedness, coordination, or steady leadership. Reality revealed the fragility of a government that had been hollowed out with expertise sidelined in favor of optics. The insistence on image over substance was exposed in stark and painful terms. A leader who built his political identity on always appearing strong suddenly looked unprepared, reactive, and ineffective. The collapse was not just political, it was visible in lives lost, systems strained, and a nation left adrift. What we are witnessing now is the inevitable reckoning that comes when reality overtakes rhetoric. The slogans that once carried rallies and dominated headlines no longer land with the same force because the public has seen the results and found them lacking. The projection of strength has given way to the perception of weakness. The endless declarations of success now serve as reminders of failures that cannot be denied. And here lies the lasting hook in politics. Words may win attention, but only results win trust. When the words and the results diverge for too long, collapse is not a question of if, but when. The collapse of Trump's plan is not simply a story of decline, it is also a moment of opportunity. When a political project built on division, short-term theatrics, and hollow promises unravels, it creates a vacuum that demands to be filled. And here lies a powerful truth. Collapse can be the spark of renewal if citizens, leaders, and institutions recognize the chance to rebuild on firmer ground. The hook is obvious yet urgent. What happens next will not be decided by the remnants of Trump's failed strategy, but by whether America chooses to seize this moment to construct something more stable, inclusive, and forward-looking. History shows us that when old orders fall, they leave behind both dangers and possibilities. Trump's plan, designed to dominate through spectacle and grievance, has left America more fractured and isolated than before. But fractures can also expose where rebuilding is most needed. For example, the erosion of global alliances under his leadership revealed just how critical those partnerships are to America's security and influence. The opportunity now lies in renewing trust, strengthening cooperation, and reasserting U.S. leadership not through coercion, but through reliability. The collapse has underscored the value of multilateralism, and it is precisely in this vacuum that America can reimagine its role in the world. Domestically, the failure of Trump's economic promises opens the door to a deeper conversation about fairness and sustainability. The tax cuts that favored the wealthy, the tariffs that burdened workers, the deficits that ballooned, these mistakes have shown where the system must change. Collapse here can inspire the construction of policies that genuinely uplift the middle class, that invest in education, infrastructure, and innovation, and that address inequality rather than exacerbate it. The hook is this: Americans now know what does not work, and with that clarity comes the responsibility to demand what does. The political exhaustion from years of division also offers a chance for renewal. Many Americans are tired of being told to hate, blame, and fear. They crave stability, unity, and leadership that aims higher than endless conflict. The failure of Trump's divisive model highlights the hunger for leaders who speak to shared aspirations rather than perpetual battles. It is in this fatigue with chaos that new voices can emerge, voices that channel energy into solutions rather than into constant outrage. The collapse of one model of politics can become the birth of another if that opportunity is seized. This moment also serves as a reminder of the resilience of institutions. Despite relentless attacks, the courts, the electoral system, and the press endured, even if battered. The hook here is powerful. Collapse has shown that no single leader is stronger than the democratic framework itself. If that framework is repaired and reinforced, it can withstand future challenges with greater strength. The opportunity lies in recognizing that institutions must be respected and reformed, not undermined, if democracy is to thrive. But opportunity is never automatic. Collapse alone does not guarantee renewal. It simply makes it possible. It falls to citizens to demand accountability, to insist on truth over rhetoric, and to resist the lure of easy slogans that mask hard realities. It falls to leaders to step beyond division and offer genuine solutions that speak to the needs of all Americans, not just to narrow bases of support. The hook here is a challenge. Will America learn from this collapse, or will it stumble into repeating the same mistakes under new slogans and faces? Trump's unraveling has revealed the limits of a politics built on anger and illusion, but it has also revealed the deep hunger for something more enduring. That hunger is the opportunity. The failures of the past years can be the foundation for a better future if they are understood as lessons rather than merely as wounds. Collapse is painful, yes, but it is also clarifying. It clears away illusions, exposes weaknesses, and forces a reckoning. And in that reckoning lies the potential to build a stronger, more honest, and more resilient path forward.